Taiyo is a pathetic orphan who managed to become besties with the hottest chick that happened to be from the strongest assassin family. However, everything changes when he learns that her life is in danger, so he marries her to clap her enemies so they can have a freaky honeymoon.
Matsumi! Why are you exposing yourself like that?
A couple of days after Taiyo lost his entire family to a brutal car accident, while staring at their pictures during the funeral, he realizes how easy it is to lose what you love and immediately pulls his hand away from a childhood friend named Matsumi. However, she grabs his hand again and promises to be there for him, no matter what, causing him to finally let out the tears he has been holding back. At school several weeks later, Matsumi shows up to feed him lunch, and when she asks why he is still trying so hard to push everyone away, he tells her to save the caring mother act for after she becomes the baby mama of some street thug. Despite his obvious attempt to scare her off, she gives him no choice but to accept her food, so he thanks her for it before asking why she turned down the captain of the soccer team. Right then, the vice principal, who clearly spent too much time watching Men in Black, shows up to steal a bite and expresses how obsessed he is with Matsumi's cooking. When she asks how he is already back from his lecture trip so soon, Kyoichiro claims that he did it all to be close to her and tells Taiyo to come see him after classes before leaving. Hours later, Taiyo ends up in his office wondering why the wannabe secret agent is sitting so close to him when there is a perfectly good office chair for him to use. The next moment, Kyoichiro shows him an entire gallery of Matsumi's pictures, but the real shock sets in when he pulls up a video where he almost sent the captain of the soccer team to his ancestors. Just as Taiyo considers screaming for help, Kyoichiro holds a knife to his neck and says he can't stand the relationship he has with Matsumi. All of a sudden, a chick dressed in toilet paper jumps in from the window, and Taiyo immediately hits the snooze button only to wake up and find himself surrounded by Matsumi and a bunch of freaks that look like they escaped Frankenstein's lab. After he jumps off the couch and demands to know what on earth is going on, Matsumi tells him that they are all her siblings and further explains that everyone in the family is an overpowered spy. Just as Kengo tries to tell them all about Kyoichiro's fame as the #1 assassin in the country, the alarm system alerts them that he is back, so Futuba cuts to the chase and tells Taiyo that he has to marry Matsumi because it's the only way to stop Kyoichiro from murking him. When Matsumi refuses and says they can't just force a family on him after he just lost his, they all decide to fight off Kyoichiro while she and Kengo run deeper into the house to hide Taiyo. However, just a few minutes later, Kyoichiro catches up to them and tells Matsumi to stop trying to protect him. After she and the dog try to attack, he unleashes his iron webs to capture them both and rips off the disguise Kengo used to make it seem like he is Matsumi. He then also tells Matsumi to drop the Taiyo disguise and accept that he is the only one that can protect her. Just as she decides to accept his psychotic obsession with protecting her, Taiyo climbs out of the painting and says he is ready to marry her. Upon seeing that he really means it, she unlocks the second half of her ring and tosses it to him. But Kyoichiro activates his steel webs again to stop Taiyo. Despite this, he squeezes right through them to grab the ring and officially becomes Matsumi's husband before the others show up and congratulate him on joining the family. At his place the following morning, Kyoichiro also welcomes him into the family with another murder attempt before proceeding to force him through an excruciating dance session with his iron webs. Thankfully, Matsumi shows up just in time to stop him. But then, Kyoichiro suddenly grabs them both and jumps out of the window to avoid a deadly bomb that instantly reduces the entire house to rubble. When Taiyo asks if that was part of his way of saying good morning, Kyoichiro says that it was actually an attempt on Matsumi's life before taking them into a limo. He then tells Taiyo that her life will always be in danger because, unlike the worthless NPCs he usually hangs around with, she is the current head of their family and will soon be taking over the underground world of assassins and spies. Kyoichiro further explains how their lineage has been filled with supernatural humans over the past centuries, with the exception of a very normal family member that appears in each generation and ends up being the one who passes down the gene that creates the next generation of overpowered assassins. With Matsumi being the current carrier and family head by default, Kyoichiro tells him that it is the responsibility of every family member to keep her alive at all costs. Just then, a group of underworld assassins begin a broad daylight assault to take her out, and Taiyo almost pees himself as the limo gets bathed in bullets. But Matsumi tells him not to worry because their dog, Goliath, is an excellent driver. While Taiyo starts praying like an exorcist who just saw the devil, Kyoichiro takes a break from his tea to handle business. After using his iron web skill to turn their enemies into human barbecue, He hops back inside and tells Taiyo that a serial bomber is targeting Matsumi before giving him his first mission, which is to keep her alive for an entire day. He then explains how the bomber likes to announce his moves on Twitter and hands Taiyo a gun before promising to reunite him with his family if anything happens to Matsumi. As Taiyo goes on to spend the rest of the day scouring the entire school for anything suspicious, he starts to notice how much attention Matsumi pays to her surroundings and becomes even more dedicated to keeping her safe. However, just a couple of minutes after lunch, he forgets how to be an antisocial weirdo for a moment and accepts a piece of chocolate from his friends before his mind catches up to reality. Moments later, he wakes up in the student council office and Matsumi explains that the infirmary was closed right before he sees a bomb strapped to the roof. After it explodes, they luckily survive thanks to his quick thinking. But he quickly realizes that the bomber must have been tracking her through his every move. Upon seeing the final bomb placed in his shirt, he decides to sacrifice himself to protect her. But after he jumps out, Kyoichiro disables it and commends him on sticking to the mission. Once they get back inside, the rest of the family shows up and says they had actually been sneaking around campus to help Taiyo since it's his first mission. Shinzo then drops the bomber, and Kyoichiro wraps him up with the bomb before throwing him into the clouds to put on a fireworks show for the rest of them. After spending the night at Matsumi's family mansion, Taiyo heads over to Futuba's room to thank her for the hospitality and ask for training so he can actually protect Matsumi when the time comes. When she tells him to stop thinking he can ever get to their level, he still claims to be ready for anything, so she demonstrates a fraction of her abilities by twirling him around like a rag doll. She then decides to let him experience their family's special training, but says he has to live with them for an entire month first. He easily accepts the condition since he is technically already homeless, but after he almost gets impaled by a trap in the floor, she apologizes for not telling him that the entire mansion is one big death machine that will book him a spot at the cemetery if he doesn't get strong as fast as possible. The following day, he tries to ignore the alarm clock for some extra shut-eye and almost becomes human-flavored bacon when it explodes. At the breakfast table moments later, he asks Matsumi how she has survived without powers, so they all explain how the mansion's computer system doesn't attack accepted members of the family. Just then, he starts complaining about a stomachache, and upon learning that they also add a bit of poison in every meal to build up tolerance, he bolts to the bathroom only to meet a security system from the future. After 3 weeks of fighting to stay alive, he starts getting the hang of the Death Mansion, which surprises everyone since it took them at least a couple of months of training to get used to the traps. During breakfast one morning, he asks Matsumi to pass the milk like always, but after taking one sip, the poison catches up to him, so he runs to the bathroom, while the others try to stop Matsumi from feeling bad about almost melting his insides. Just then, they all hear Kengo calling out to him and find him passed out by the door, so Nano quickly takes him to the lab to make sure he is okay. As soon as he regains consciousness and claims to be perfectly okay, Futuba tells him to drop the act and yanks off the fake body he got from Kengo before saying that she already knows he has been getting help from the others to make it seem like he has been getting strong on his own. She then expresses her disappointment with Nano for letting him do something so stupid, and when he tries to take the blame, she adds a concussion to the list of his health problems and says he has to take it slow before giving him a book from when she started training. Just a few days later, he makes a full recovery thanks to Nano's medical expertise and also manages to crack the code in the bathroom, so they all celebrate him before his ring suddenly starts glowing. Upon seeing it, they explain that the mansion has accepted him as a member of the family, so Futuba agrees to start his assassin training since he has proven himself worthy. While walking to class with Matsumi at the start of the following week, Taiyo senses a baseball heading straight for her head and catches it without even looking, causing the coach of the baseball team to think they just found the solution to their years of failure. Hours later, they both go up to the roof for lunch, but then he notices the weird look she has been giving him and asks if he did something. After telling him to be careful with the way he uses his skills in public, she explains how all the girls started calling him a Walmart ninja because of his silent step. Back at home that afternoon, he joins her in the family office to take care of a ton of paperwork, and when he asks why she is the only one doing them, she reminds him that she is the head of the family before noticing that Kengo forgot to add a certain attachment for their weekly reports. Moments later, they get to his room and almost get knocked out by the smell of his massive laundry pile before he sticks his head out of the very top to ask what they want. Matsumi then asks why he always pretends to forget the report, and he responds by pulling out his lunch and telling her to do it herself if it's that important. Taiyo immediately tries to find the report himself so they can get it over with, But then Kengo jumps out of the pile with his magnum swinging in the wind and says he doesn't deserve the stress of work. When she tells him to continue the rant with pants on, he reminds her that she used to play in the bath with him just a couple of years ago before she became a middle-aged Karen trapped in a baddie's body. This pushes Matsumi over the edge, so she decides to discipline him, but he quickly uses his clone skill to fool Taiyo before running out of the room. However, Matsumi decides to put the entire mansion on lockdown mode to make sure he cannot escape. Meanwhile, Shinzo has just started a top-secret mission to infiltrate a fake money company, but after he secures the plate they use to forge the bills, the building's alarm systems go off. Back at the mansion, Matsumi and Taiyo start to consider giving up because they have already looked everywhere, but then they see him hiding inside a painting. Taiyo immediately tries to catch him and ends up being too fast for Matsumi, but after she catches up and sees that he escaped into a secret vent, she gets fed up and deactivates lockdown mode. She then decides to find the report with Taiyo, but as soon as they get inside his room, she slaps a cuff on his wrist and tells him to drop the disguise. When he asks what she is talking about, she tells him to stop the act because he definitely captured the real Taiyo and put on the disguise to make her stop the lockdown. After she tells him that Taiyo would never walk into a room before her, Kengo drops the disguise and accepts that she isn't the slow-brained little sister he used to play with. Later that day, she serves Taiyo a delicious meal, and he thanks her for finally giving him some regular food before the ungodly amount of cyanide inside it catches up to him. Just then, he hears the phone and decides to answer it, only to get his eardrums blown apart by Shinzo's screams. After Matsumi switches to a video call, he begs her for help because he just ran out of ammo at the worst possible time. She then tells Taiyo that he is a spineless man-baby without guns and says he has to go help out. Minutes later, Taiyo gets inside the building, but as he tries to find Shinzo, a guard spots him and starts asking questions while holding a gun to his head. Using the weapons training Shinzo gave him, he disarms the guard and knocks him out before also taking down the others in that section. As soon as he finds Shinzo, the gun-addicted weeb starts hugging a pistol. But then every goon in the facility shows up, so he gets back into character and smokes them like a tweaked-out version of John Wick. However, while trying to run outside, Taiyo gets shot right through his thigh, and after he drops, the sniper threatens to blow his brains out if Shinzo doesn't surrender. The moment he drops the gun, Taiyo throws him a fork, which he then uses to destroy the sniper's rifle before taking him out. While he ends up carrying Taiyo home, a detective named Seiji finds the facility and tries to interrogate the only guard Shinzo left, but he refuses to say a word, so Seiji splits his head open and decides to focus on Taiyo. A couple nights later, he sees Taiyo heading home and asks for a friendly chat down at the precinct. After getting to an interrogation room, he pulls up photos from all of Taiyo's recent escapades and asks for details on the people he works with because there is no way a slow-brained midget like him can pull off so many missions alone. When Taiyo claims to have no idea what he is talking about, he casually spikes a glass of water right in front of him and shoves it down his throat, but Taiyo was already expecting that for some reason. However, after he gets rid of the water, Seiji tries to attack him with the hammer, so he jumps back and lands on a pile of bodies. As Seiji then threatens to smash his skull, he still refuses to tell him anything about Matsumi's family and says he would rather join his parents in heaven. Seiji then decides to grant his wish, but after he breaks the wall, Kyoichiro comes out and tells him to stop the test. Taiyo immediately asks what he means, so he reveals that Seiji is the one who covers their tracks in exchange for receiving their help for his twisted fantasy of being a psychotic version of Batman. After saying that he didn't expect Taiyo to last 2 seconds, Seiji tries to ask Kyoichiro for help, but the sister-loving creep claims to have an urgent mission and leaves. In class the following day, Taiyo notices a weird wave of fatigue taking over his body before Kyoichiro walks in and says he will be filling in for their first lesson. As soon as he starts teaching, Taiyo tries to get some shut-eye and almost gets his third eye unlocked by a supersonic chalk, but dodges at the last moment. Kyoichiro then uses Morse code to tell him that he has to stay awake for the rest of the class despite feeling like his eyelids weigh 50 pounds. After he further explains that he needs to master the half-awakened state to make sure he can fight at all times, Matsumi joins their Morse code chat and tells him to stop trying to turn Taiyo into a death machine. The next moment he unleashes a special gas that puts everyone to sleep, but Matsumi thankfully had her gas mask close by, so she remains conscious and continues trying to stop Kyoichiro. Upon seeing Taiyo's head bowed, Kyoichiro tries to attack him with one of the chalks again, but Taiyo activates the half-awakened state to protect himself. Kyoichiro then spends the rest of the day training him to master it, but later on in the night, Taiyo ends up scaring Shinzo with his violent sleepwalking. A couple nights later, Shine completes a 3-day gaming marathon and tries to get some much-needed rest. But a freaky hacker suddenly gets past her firewall, so she gets back up to make sure she doesn't access any valuable data. In a matter of seconds, she gets into the hacker's system and tries to shut everything down, but she escapes at the last moment with a bunch of Taiyo's pictures. Early the next day, she drags herself out of her room to tell Taiyo and Matsumi about it. But after saying they don't have anything else to worry about, she wonders how the hacker got in, because only family members have the access key to get past the firewall. While walking to school moments later, Taiyo barely escapes a sudden attack and sees the freaky hacker stalking them, so he makes a run for it with Matsumi and waits in an alley to ambush her. However, she surprises him by attacking from the roof before professing her love for him and asking if he would kindly stay still so she can rip his heart out of his chest. Just then, Matsumi recognizes Ayaka and tells Taiyo that she is a famous assassin that only goes after guys she finds attractive so she can stuff them with needles as a way of demonstrating her psychotic love. When he asks why on earth she would want him, she claims it was love at first sight when she first saw a video of him on the dark web. The next moment, she drops another assassin that was gunning for him before showing him a bounty that went public and saying that she has to poke holes in his glizzy before anyone else. After he calmly turns down the offer and says he has to stay alive for Matsumi, Ayaka tells her to be grateful to Kyoichiro because although he was the one who gave her the passkey to steal files on Taiyo, he made her promise not to lay a finger on his precious sister. She then shows off a small fraction of her abilities and promises to be back before running off. The very next day, she joins his class as a new student and immediately resumes Operation Murk My Crush. However, despite spending the rest of the week trying to ambush him, he easily evades all her attacks and starts acting like she doesn't even exist at a certain point. That all ends one afternoon in class when she suddenly decides to turn everyone into mindless zombies. After they all pin Taiyo down, Matsumi tries to defend him, but then the assassin from the alley shows up to get his revenge. The next moment, Matsumi shoves her away and almost takes a bullet to the head before Taiyo uses his stun gun to knock out the assassin. Ayaka then asks why she would save her, and Matsumi claims it is because she is happy someone else can see how amazing Taiyo is. This causes Ayaka to instantly become obsessed and leads to Taiyo becoming the third wheel during their walk home. Days later, Nano calls Taiyo in the middle of his workout to tell him about his current mission to neutralize a top-secret bioweapon capable of ending all life in the small city. When Taiyo asks if he plans to take out the scientists working in the lab, Nano explains that his mission is just to make sure the poison bomb never sees the light of day. He then proceeds to swallow it and tells Taiyo to come get him out of the lab because his body shuts down whenever he activates his poison-destroying abilities. A couple minutes after he loses consciousness, Taiyo finds the lab but gets suspicious when he sees that most of the guards have already been knocked out. The next moment, he sees two assassins named Sui and Oga and immediately prepares himself for a fight. However, Sui explains that they are elite government spies sent to destroy the lab, and Oga immediately starts glazing because Taiyo has apparently become a celebrity in the underworld. After he decides to help them take down everyone else in the lab, they finally find Nano, but when Taiyo runs over to check on him, Oga attacks and tells him to stay back because they have to murk Nano to make sure the poison never gets out. The moment Taiyo steps in front of his body to fight them off, Sui unleashes a supersonic skill that destroys his gun and leaves him paralyzed with countless cuts across his entire body. He then promises to make Nano's final moments painless, but he wakes up at the last moment and promises Sui that the poison has been neutralized. After he shows him a poison patch to prove it, Sui decides to spare him and hands over a special ointment for Taiyo's wounds before saying that it would be pointless to save such a pathetic weakling. At the mansion the following day, Kyoichiro decides to slow-cook Taiyo for bringing shame to the family, but Nano and Matsumi show up just in time to save him. When he tells them to stop and says he actually deserves to be punished for having a negative effect on the reputation they have built in the underworld, Kyoichiro tells him to stop thinking a talentless nobody can make people stop fearing him. He then offers to spare him if he manages to redeem himself by becoming better than Sui. On a train days later, Sui notices him and claims he could sense the lack of aura a mile away. After Taiyo admits to being a weakling and says that he plans to tail him until he learns enough to get stronger, Sui tells him to give up because he will never be able to keep up with him. As soon as they get to the stop, he activates his light speed skill to move without detection. but Taiyo quickly figures out a way to keep up, so Sui shreds off his clothes to keep him occupied. Despite that, Taiyo spends the following weeks tailing him and Oga on every mission and refuses to give up despite getting his nuts exposed more times than he can count. Days later, he finally manages to make it to the end of an entire day with his clothes still intact. But then Sui decides that it's time to end their freaky game of tag. After promising to make it quick, he charges in, but Taiyo surprisingly stops him in the middle of the attack because the countless strip downs helped him master the flow of Sui's slices. He then yeets the fun-sized shredder to the other side of the cemetery, causing Sui to accept that he actually has potential. As Oga starts cleaning up his wounds and commends him, Sui decides to stop treating him like a complete waste of existence. A couple days after that, Matsumi makes Taiyo follow her to the park with enough supplies for an all-you-can-eat buffet. He then tries to figure out what she has planned and gets the shock of his life when she finds Sui and greets him like they are old friends. When he asks how they know each other, Matsumi reminds him that everyone in the underworld had crossed paths at some point. After saying they should save the chit-chat for the meeting with his boss, Sui takes them to a cafe and orders a milkshake that sounds like a biohazard. However, the cashier immediately starts punching it in, but instead of a milkshake, they get dropped into a chute. And while Sui takes the opportunity to show Matsumi how a real man acts, Taiyo ends up fighting to stay alive until they get to the bottom. Just then, he gets saved from a boulder by a baddie with more milk than Sydney Sweeney. Moments later, Ran starts munching down on all the cake they brought while Matsumi explains that she is the leader of Sui's elite squad and was also in the same class as Kyoichiro. Just as Ran tells her not to mention the Alabama freak's name around her, he blasts in through the wall and demands for Matsumi's release. Rin then tells him that she came all on her own because she got tired of having a brother who constantly tries to get freaky. The next moment, they start a fight that slowly destroys the entire floor, so Sui tries to stop them only to get smacked aside like a worthless fly. When Matsumi suddenly gets in between their punches to stop them, Taiyo pushes her head down and gets his cheekbones pulverized in the process. However, this causes Rin to realize that he can be trusted, so she asks for his help uncovering the plans of a politician who recently became the nation's favorite despite the fact that he dresses like KFC's mascot and is obsessed with dancing. She also tells him about the triplet assassins working for him and says they need someone new to the underworld because Yoshimasa would easily notice any member of her squad or any of Matsumi's siblings. At a rally the following afternoon, Yoshimasa introduces his latest assistant to his supporters, and as they all dance, Taiyo starts to regret picking a female disguise for the mission. Over the next couple of days, he pays close attention to Yoshimasa and his assassin triplets to get even the slightest hint of their plan, but they simply continue to horrify him with their terrible dancing. When Yoshimasa makes the mistake of forcing him to dance with them, he finally realizes that they have been using Morse code this entire time and quickly learns all the details of their plans to blow up all his ops. A couple days later, they get set up for a meeting with every public figure that hasn't supported him, and he patiently waits for them to get on stage before setting off the bomb, but they all get shocked when it blows up in the fountain instead. The next moment, Yoshimasa points his gun towards Taiyo and says he always knew, before pulling the trigger. After he deploys a second bomb they installed at the last moment, the entire hall gets covered in fluff, and Taiyo gets back up to say he isn't the only one with tricks up his sleeve. The triplets then get ready to take him down, but Sui destroys their guns in an instant, so they make a run for it. Minutes later, Taiyo ends up in a bus watching Yoshimasa as they transport him to a prison facility. But then the mildly pregnant clown suddenly says that the accident that destroyed his family was planned. As soon as Taiyo starts asking for the truth, Sui calls to tell him that the Prime Minister was kidnapped after the second bomb went off. Just then, Yoshimasa says he has to head out and drops an earring that blows up the entire bus. After Taiyo manages to pull himself out, Sui tells him that Yoshimasa was actually an assassin like them before he suddenly vanished years ago and made everyone believe he was dead. Minutes later, he joins the Prime Minister at the abduction site for a live broadcast to the entire nation, and after pulling off his disguise, he admits to countless murders and tells the minister to admit to his or take a bullet to the head. Just as the minister tells him to get it over with, Taiyo ends the broadcast by shooting the camera. He then tells Yoshimasa to give up, but he refuses and tells Taiyo that his gun is useless because he is not close enough. As soon as he shoots the gun away, Taiyo charges in to pin him down. But he ends up being the one captured and gets confused by how easy it was for Yoshimasa to read all his moves. After the triplets show up, Taiyo takes a step back to plan his next move properly, But Sui also shows up and uses a combination move to take the triplets several floors under. The next moment, Taiyo charges in with one of Shinzo's poison knives, but Yoshimasa reads through his attack once again and stabs him with it. While he bleeds out and struggles to stay conscious, Sui waits for the triplets to combine their abilities into a large fireball before using his sonic step skill to take them out. Back at the top, Taiyo manages to pull himself back up and charges in again, so Yoshimasa prepares to read his moves, but this time, Taiyo copies Sui's sonic step and combines it with every trick he has learned to take him down. Upon realizing that he has been defeated, Yoshimasa commends him on becoming so skilled despite all he had been through and decides to tell him about the accident. However, the moment he places a note in his hand, a bullet flies through his neck, and he bleeds out while Taiyo tries to figure out where it came from. Hours later, he follows the instructions on the note to a tree and finds a small box inside before heading back home. After they all welcome him back, he tries to finally get some rest, but Ayaka suddenly wraps her kitty around his head, so he throws her off and asks why she dressed like a maid. After Matsumi explains that they hired her as the new live-in maid, Ayaka claims she only took the job to make sure no one murks him before her because the bounty on his head has gone up. She also offers to help him become a better assassin and immediately resumes her attacks to keep him on his toes. In the kitchen several minutes later, he hears Matsumi complaining about running out of the tea Kirichiro likes best before heading to the bath to wash up. The next moment, Ayaka shows up to snag a couple pictures of his glizzy before chasing him around with acid shampoo until she sets off the electric trap while standing in the bath. Instead of calling for help, Taiyo decides to join her in the bath and redirects the current to the power source until the entire bathroom blows up. For some reason, he ends up on top of her and takes the opportunity to work on his riz, but immediately regrets it when Kirichiro shows up and promises to make him pay for cheating. On his way out the next day, Matsumi tries to give him his phone, but then she sees a call from a number saved as Kaoru and tries to ask who it is. After he immediately grabs the phone and runs off, Ayaka tells Matsumi to accept that he has found a special glizzy gobbler on the side. When he gets back later in the evening, she pins him to the wall and starts demanding answers before Kirichiro also joins her and promises to make sure his nuts never see the light of day. Just then, Momiji and her grandfather Kaoru from Rin's squad show up, and Momiji says she came to make a special delivery for Taiyo. When he reminds her that it was meant to be a secret, she replies that sneaking around will only cause misunderstandings. She then pulls out the special tea Matsumi was talking about the other night and explains how Taiyo risked his life for hours to gather the items used in making it. Upon hearing this, Kyoichiro tries to cut open his own skull, but after they all get seated for tea time, his hatred for Taiyo returns, so Matsumi decides to punish him by making Goliath pin him to the chair. After a quick training session with Futuba a couple days later, Taiyo heads back inside and gets curious when they see Matsumi obsessing over a photo album. When she calls them to look at the picture they took after Nano got his spy license, Taiyo asks what a spy license is, so Futuba explains the ranking system for spies and says he will not be officially recognized by the association until he passes the spy test to receive his license. Just as he says he would like to take the test, Kyoichiro shows up to tell him that everyone in the family made it on their first try before giving him a sample of the torture he will endure if he brings shame to the family name again. At the examination venue days later, Matsumi cheers on as he easily blazes through the first competition, but when he meets up with her to recharge for the next one, a competitor decides to take him out to claim the bounty on his head. The moment he charges in, a gust of wind flips him like a pancake before a spy named Tsukio reminds him that it's illegal for contestants to fight each other. After he leaves, Taiyo tries to thank him, but he immediately starts asking for friendly backshots. Taiyo then tells Matsumi to run, but she takes one look at Tsukio before telling Taiyo not to worry because everyone in the underworld knows that he is a harmless sausage-loving freak. She then threatens to chop off his worthless nuts since he doesn't want to use them the right way, but he responds by dragging Taiyo away for the rest of the exam. After enduring a grueling couple of hours, only a handful of the examinees make it to the last stage, and they all get excited when they hear an announcement saying that they only have to walk to the end of the hall to get their license. However, the entire floor suddenly starts falling apart, so they all take off running to reach the end, but after almost everyone else falls into the water underneath, the Mohawk ambassador slams his fist into Taiyo to knock him down. Right before the ground under his feet crumbles, Tsukio commends him on being determined and pushes him forward with his abilities, but Taiyo runs back to save him from falling. When he tells Tsukiyo not to throw away his shot at getting the license, the zesty airbender gets them both back into the hall before telling Taiyo that he has already passed. Turns out he is already a silver-rank spy and was only serving as the examiner to see which of them still had their dignity intact. Just then, the other examiner snatches the license from the Mohawk ambassador, and after collecting it from Tsukiyo, Taiyo asks if he was also joking about the backshots, but Tsukiyo says he meant every word and tries to get freaky right there. Several days later, Seiji hears about the escape of a top priority inmate and immediately decides to call Kyoichiro. Meanwhile, Taiyo, who has just gotten back home, finds an old geezer hiding in his bag and freezes in shock. After Ban jumps out and claims to be his grandfather, Taiyo welcomes him with a supercharged EMP blast before Matsumi shows up and says he is actually her grandfather. When she asks for the reason behind his sudden visit, he takes a moment to ask Ayaka out on a date before claiming that he wanted to make sure Taiyo had enough balls to protect his granddaughter. The next moment he tries to take Taiyo out for a bonding session, but Kyoichiro captures him and asks why he escaped his cell. Ban then explains how boring his current mission to spy on incarcerated criminals is and says he just wanted to experience the outside world again. After telling everyone that Ban loves to leak classified intel to impress the hoes, Kyoichiro promises to return him to prison, but then Ban tells him that having gray hairs doesn't make him weaker than he was in his prime. The next moment, he escapes Kyoichiro's iron webs and deploys a smoke bomb to escape with Taiyo. At a bar hours later, Taiyo gets tired of watching his pathetic attempt at being a player and uses a special glue from Nano to pin him to the seat. However, Ban easily jumps out of his clothes to reveal his shredded bod and monster magnum to the ladies. After several minutes of evading all of Taiyo's attacks, Ban then tells him to try again in a decade. But Taiyo suddenly gets curious and asks why he couldn't just wait until the end of his mission if he really just wanted to see them. Ban replies that it had to be today and proceeds to start telling him stories about Matsumi's grandmother and how she saved him from becoming a worthless street thug with her perfect beauty. A couple minutes into their conversation, Keiko shows up and makes sure he can't escape with a special handcuff rig to explode if he uses his abilities. As he immediately starts begging her for the usual anniversary makeout session, Matsumi shows up and tells Taiyo she is her grandmother. Moments later, Ban continues begging Keiko for a date and says he broke out just to see her, but she asks why he chose to ball out a bunch of OnlyFans hoes instead of coming to see her first. She then helps the police rearrest him, but decides to join him in the car so they can spend a bit of time together before he gets placed in solitary. Despite this, he breaks out again just a few days later, but after only meeting Ayaka, she tells him that they all went shopping. In a dream a couple days later, Taiyo relives the road trip he was on with his family before the tragic accident that only he survived. He and Matsumi then go over to Shan's room with the hope that she might have found something in the orb he saw in Yoshimasa's box. When she pulls up the guest list for their parents' wedding and shows them his mom and dad's name in the list, Matsumi breaks down and says their family is probably the reason why they were targeted. Taiyo manages to calm her down and explains that there has to be some other reason, and Shine also agrees before telling him about a place called the Library of the Dead where he could possibly find better information. Shortly after that, he finds the secret entrance to the library and gains access with his card. But upon entering the library, he watches as the attendant suddenly stabs through a dude's head and carries him off for talking. As Xian then warns him to avoid making a single sound, Mi-chan continues picking off guys that dare make the mistake of breathing too loudly. After almost an hour of searching, Taiyo finds a book with details of his family's accident, but gets disappointed because it only shows him what he already knows. However, he then notices a slot for the blue orb, so he drops it in and sees that his family was actually assassinated by a group called Tanpopo. Back at the mansion later that day, Kyoichiro turns him into a lab rat for his latest torture technique, before revealing that Tanpopo is the group behind the death of Matsumi's mother. He then tells Taiyo that his discovery of what happened to his parents helped him narrow down the list of suspects involved in a series of murders done in the medical field around the time of the accident. With the prime suspect now being a doctor named Makoto, Kyoichiro suggests breaking into his clinic to figure out how he is connected to everything. The following afternoon, Matsumi and Taiyo both disguise themselves as a sick old man and his wife before going into the clinic for a checkup. After minutes of waiting, they get called in to see Makoto, who then runs a couple tests, all while looking like the ideal doctor. A couple hours after sundown, Makoto finally leaves his office for the night, so Taiyo sneaks inside to hack into his computer with help from Shan's devices. In just a couple of minutes, he finds classified information on the special protein that has been passed down through Matsumi's family to create overpowered spies like her siblings. Just as he finds a plan to take her heart and artificially create the protein for profit, Makoto attacks him and rips off the disguise before expressing his shock at seeing that he is still alive. When Taiyo asks if he is the one responsible for the accident as well as what happened to Matsumi's mom, Makoto tells him to ask them when he gets to the other side. However, after he stabs an iron plate in his shirt, Taiyo kicks him back and tries to zap him, but he captures the blast with his bare hands before using a flashbang to escape. Luckily, Taiyo had already extracted all the data, so he promises himself to figure out the whole truth and keep Matsumi protected while at it. At the mansion later that night, he uploads all the data to a computer to find more clues, but after several minutes of useless information, he sees a bunch of receipts for a hotel reservation. Upon realizing that the hotel has a very similar name to the dandelion tattoo every Tampopo member has, he decides to go search for more answers at the hotel. The following day, he manages to sneak in under the guise of a new employee, and Kyoichiro calls to tell him about some intel he received claiming that Makoto has already checked into a suite at the top of the hotel. After also telling him that he sent Shinzo to offer backup, he wishes him luck and hangs up the phone before facing Futaba, who then asks why he is suddenly being so helpful. After claiming that he is only doing this to help Taiyo get closure for what happened to his family, he tells her to try minding her business and leaves. By then, Taiyo has just found the elevator, so he tries to take it up to the suite, but after getting his skull punched into a wall, another employee tells him that the top is off-limits to low-level peasants like him. Minutes later, Taiyo starts climbing up the hotel with a special pair of gloves Nano gave him, but just as he gets close to the top, the glass begins to crack as a plot-heady gold digger starts a heated argument with her sugar daddy for not letting her get the latest Louis V purse. After she throws the heaviest vase she can find, Taiyo falls into the pool and almost dies of a heart attack before he hears a lady telling one of the attendants to take her pet lioness up to her suite. Shortly after that, a beefy Chad called Noman joins Makoto in his suite to tell him about a suspicious employee that has been trying to get to the top. But Makoto ignores it to ask if he can put on a shirt he just completed. After Nauman refuses, he hands over the latest batch of a certain drug and promises that there won't be any side effects this time. Just then, they see the lioness from before telling them both to freeze, but after Makoto recognizes the voice and asks Taiyo why he is making him regret the decision to spare his life, Taiyo pulls off the disguise. The next moment, Newman pulls out a whole frame of glass and throws it at him before attempting to crush him with a powerful punch. Makoto then tells him to use Taiyo to test out the drug before flying off. After pulling it out of the pouch and explaining that it is an artificial version of the protein that gives Matsumi's family their powers, he turns himself into a budget-friendly adaptation of the Red Hulk and proceeds to break almost every bone in Taiyo's body. Meanwhile, Makoto makes a phone call to a mysterious fellow in a robe who just showed up outside the hotel. Just as Newman grabs Taiyo by the neck to finish him off, Shinzo blasts into the room and shoots Newman with a plasma beam before arming himself with every gun in his high-tech trash can. After surviving the blast, Newman asks if that's the best a member of the Yozakura family can do, so Shinzo empties all his clips into him before throwing Taiyo out of the building. The next moment, Newman charges in to attack him, but Shinzo easily holds him back until he shows him a button embedded into his teeth and says he will blow the entire hotel into next week if he doesn't back down. Left with no other choice, Shinzo stops fighting and ends up becoming Nauman's lab rat. But after a couple minutes of shaking the entire hotel with his powerful punches, Newman asks why he won't just give up already. Shinzo then tells him that becoming a mutant won't give him the same punching power as Mike Tyson. All of a sudden, he receives a call from the staff about a psycho shooting up the hotel, and that psycho turns out to be none other than Taiyo. With the help of all the fake ammo he could gather, he scares everyone in the hotel to the point where they jump out of the balconies into foam beds he placed outside. Upon hearing that everyone in the hotel has been evacuated, Shinzo powers up a maxed-out electric cannon and says he is the only one capable of firing it because of its insane recoil. He then lets off a blast and draws lightning straight from the source before deep-frying every blood vessel in Noman's body. He then tells Taiyo that they can head home, but just as Taiyo tries to run up to meet him, he falls into the arms of the cloaked old man from before and thanks him for the assist. The moment he leaves, Shinzo shows up to thank him for the help, but then he suddenly sees multiple injuries across his body before he drops and loses consciousness. At the mansion an hour later, Nano managed to stabilize him, so they all leave Matsumi to watch over him, and Shinzo takes the opportunity to tell Kyoichiro that there is only one person capable of delaying the body's reaction to an attack like that. The next moment, an alarm starts going off, and this surprises Matsumi since it's not the usual time, but then Cheyenne explains that it can only mean there are up to 1,000 intruders trying to break in. Outside the mansion, an entire army of juiced-up assassins prepare to invade under the command of a man named Yama, who then establishes communication with Makoto to keep him updated. As they all charge straight for the entrance, they meet Goliath, who then reveals his most powerful form before treating them like his chew toys. After Futuba and the others join the fight, Yama sends a unit to break down the front door, but they meet Kyoichiro waiting on the steps and make the mistake of thinking they can all handle him. Using his iron webs, he holds the first group in place while Goliath tears through as many as he can sink his teeth into. The next moment, Yama decides to take matters into his own hands and apologizes in advance before he throws himself into the air and shatters Goliath's jaw with a powerful punch that sends them both crashing through the front door. Kyoichiro then promises to make his death slow and painful before suddenly realizing that someone is jamming their comms. The next moment, Momo activates lockdown mode, sealing Yama inside the mansion with Matsumi and Teo still inside. After telling Futuba not to worry because they definitely want Matsumi alive, Kyoichiro decides to go find Momo to collect the ring he is using to take over the mansion. By the time Kyoichiro finds Momo, who turns out to be their father, Yama cuts off the electricity in the entire mansion, leaving Matsumi in a state of confusion as she has no idea how to keep Taio's vitals from crashing. Upon noticing that his pulse is rapidly dropping, she remembers a conversation she had with her mom years ago about the power of their blood and quickly finds a needle to start a transfusion. Moments later, her blood starts flowing into his veins, but as she tries to wake him up with her voice, Yama finds the room and pounces. The next moment, Taiyo wakes up and easily pushes him back with his newfound abilities. Yama notices this and still tries to subdue him before he reaches max strength, but Taiyo easily punches him through the wall and continues evading all his moves before Matsumi's blood suddenly crashes his nervous system. As Yama slowly walks over to finish him off, Matsumi hugs him to help control the effects of her blood, and when he tells her to save herself instead, she tells him there is nowhere else to go because of the lockdown. After pulling out a gun and saying that she would rather go out with him than let her heart fall into the wrong hands, she tries to hug him again, but Yama throws her aside to smash his head in. However, Taiyo finally gets the hang of it right on time and proceeds to blast a hole through Yama's digestive system. While the wannabe Hulk takes a trip to the great beyond, Kyoichiro asks Momo why he went this far just to force Matsumi into a situation where she would have no choice but to inject Taiyo with her blood. After saying that he just wanted to make sure his daughter has a strong husband, he wishes him luck and turns to leave. But Kyoichiro unleashes a powerful skill with his webs and nearly obliterates the entire forest. However, Momo casually grabs all the webs and reminds Kyoichiro that he was the one who taught him everything he knows. Despite this, Kyoichiro still manages to retrieve the ring, but by the time he gets back home, he finds Shinzo and Nano trying to hold Taiyo, who has apparently gone nuts. After explaining that Matsumi's blood is still a bit much for his mind to handle, he holds Taiyo in place with his webs and places Cheyenne's headphones on his head before telling Matsumi to save him from insanity with her voice. They all immediately try to stop her and remind Kyoichiro what happened the last time she tried to sing, but he ignores them and prepares to cheer. Matsumi then proceeds to horrify the local wildlife with her demonic vocal cords and snaps Taiyo out of his insanity. After waking up with insanely painful cramps the following day, Taiyo gets ready for school and tells Matsumi that he has to go so the school authorities won't find out about his extracurricular activities. When she asks if he can go with Nano, he asks if the 7-feet-tall monstrosity she calls her little brother actually goes to school with a bucket on his face, but then she tells Nano to reveal his true form. After injecting himself with a mysterious substance, Nano reverts to his regular body, leaving Taiyo frozen in shock. On the way to school minutes later, he explains that his usually mutated state is what keeps his unstable DNA from going off the rails and says he only reverts to a normal body for school. Just then, his ears start to mutate, but he tells Taiyo not to worry about it. Shortly after that, Taiyo meets up with his friends to walk to class, but then Taiyo calls him to come to the biology lab. Moments later, he gets there and sees Nano's body going berserk. so he immediately tries to help him up, but Nano claims it's no big deal again before showing him how to inject another liquid to get it under control. Just then, a chick named Rin walks in with a python on her neck and asks if he is feeling okay, getting dangerously close to check his temperature. After causing his Excalibur to mutate, she casually leaves and acts like Taiyo doesn't even exist. Nano then tells him that she only cares about animals before showing him a special drug that will permanently keep him in a mutated state. He further explains that there is no point in fighting his body, but just as he tries to inject himself, Taiyo stops him and turns his eyes into Niagara Falls before promising to help him maintain a normal life until he learns to control his mutation. While he spends the rest of the day shooting Nano with control drugs, Rin goes back to the lab to feed the animals, but her python swallows one of Nano's pills and becomes a reincarnation of Orochimaru. Moments later, Nano tries to enjoy an acupuncture session from Taiyo, but after two of Rin's besties show up, they hear screams and run down to the lab. Upon seeing Rin's unconscious body and one of the python's scales, Nano realizes what happened and blames himself. But then Rin wakes up and immediately runs out to save the python that almost used her as a quick snack. Taiyo then promises to keep all the other animals safe, so Nano follows Rin to the server room to draw the python out. The moment it reveals itself and ignores the rats to eat her instead, Nano accepts what has to be done and thanks her for all the time they spent together before transforming his hand and letting the python bite on it so his cells can cancel out the mutation. The next moment, he runs out and Taiyo helps him up to the roof despite looking like he got stung by every insect in Australia. After thanking him for the help, Nano says that there is no point in being normal since Rin has already seen his true form and pushes Taiyo aside so he won't be able to stop him. Despite this, Taiyo slams his palm into the syringe and pulls him in for a hug to help him regain control. He then reminds him of the promise they made earlier on, so Nano agrees to keep fighting for his normal life before they both realize that Rin has been patiently waiting for their bromance to end. After picking up her salamander, she tells Nano that she doesn't have a problem with his metamorphosis, causing them to realize that she just classified him as an insect. She also tells Taiyo that she just noticed how close he is to Nano, which causes them to think she might know the truth about the family. But then she asks why he didn't just say that he wanted to join the club before dragging him away to fill a membership form. Days later, Matsumi interrupts Taiyo's training session with Shinzo to tell them about the invitation she won to a special hot springs hotel for spies in the underworld. Back at the mansion a couple of minutes after that, Kyoichiro expresses his excitement over finally getting to see how large her cakes have grown, only to get his hopes dashed when Futuba reminds him of an important mission he needs to attend to immediately. After Matsumi promises to make sure he doesn't miss the next one, he regains his excitement and runs off, but suddenly returns to tell Taiyo that he will not hesitate to dice his nuts like chopped liver if he even thinks of getting freaky at the hotel. Hours later, they all get into a family van, but Shinzo gets worried about the weird road they are taking and asks Cheyenne if her maps are actually working. After she tells him not to worry about it, they dive off a cliff and immediately start saying their last prayers after dropping into the water. But Cheyenne activates the van's submarine mode before explaining that they can't reach the hotel through a normal road. After a deep swim into the ocean, they finally locate the hotel, but the moment they get to the reception, the leader of a gang recognizes them and immediately gets into position for a battle. Just as Taiyo charges in to attack him, a chick the same size as the dwarves from Snow White jumps in and reminds the gang leader that fighting is prohibited in the hotel. For some reason, he immediately backs down, and Emma proceeds to welcome Matsumi and the others before giving Taiyo a proper greeting since they have never met before. Minutes later, they all get settled into their rooms, but after Futaba attacks Shine for trying to watch porn, she walks over to Matsumi and claims to know the real reason why she wanted to go on the trip before assuring her that Taiyo will understand when she tells him the truth. By sundown, they all meet up at the dining hall for dinner, but the gang leader from before shows up again to throw a tantrum and accidentally spills his beer all over Futuba. As the entire hall suddenly goes silent to watch her reaction, she completely loses it due to the high level of alcohol in her system and goes on a rampage, so Taiyo carries Matsumi back to her room for safety. Upon seeing the bath in her room, he decides to go take a shower in his, but she stops in and asks if they can share the bath instead. Meanwhile, Kyoichiro has just shown up and tells Emma that the mission was surprisingly easy before she leads him to the dining hall. Moments later, Matsumi joins Taiyo in the bath, and after noticing how weird he is acting, she reminds him that they are married before suddenly standing up to show him the racks on her chest. He immediately asks what she is doing, but after he spots a scar in between her milkers, she tells him that Tampopo once kidnapped her and tried to steal her heart. However, Momo showed up to rescue her but abandoned the family after that day. She then proceeds to tell him all about the plan he cooked up with Tampopo just so she would infuse him with her blood and apologizes for bringing him into such a dysfunctional family. However, Taiyo pulls her closer and suggests going to see her dad before saying that he has fully accepted everything that comes with her family. The next moment, Hyochiro throws what is left of Shinzo into the pool and reminds Taiyo of his promise to shred his nuts if he tried to do anything unholy. Just as he tries to attack, Futuba shows up with every assassin in the hotel so they can take their revenge on him with a pillow fight, and after hours of fighting, they all manage to defeat the feared sister-loving creep. Several weeks later, Sui and Oga break into one of Makoto's labs, hoping to finally catch him, but they get blindsided by a deadly bomb while Makoto watches from the other side before going to have a chat with a white-haired lady. At the Yozakura mansion the following day, Matsumi pours herself a cup of tea and wonders how Taiyo's plan to see her dad will work out before Goliath shows up to comfort her. Moments later, Ayaka shows up to give her a briefing on all the work her siblings have been putting into tracking down Makoto, and says they have only been able to figure out the routes his organization uses to transport large batches of the gene-altering substitute he made. After thanking her for the update, Matsumi rewards her with a nap on her thighs before starting to worry about Taiyo's safety. Meanwhile, Makoto has just met up with Momo on one of his organization's trains to discuss a new plan. Just a couple cars away from them, Taiyo turns his new job as an attendant into a cardio session as he runs laps across the train, attending to almost every customer as they all continue complaining about not being able to see or smell their food properly. After he saves a boy who somehow managed to get on top of the train, he drops his gun and almost loses his motivation to find something that could lead him to Makoto. But after remembering that he has to complete the mission for Matsumi's sake, he heads back inside and sees the white-haired girl from before about to fall over. After he pulls her up, Yuki hands over his gun and says she saw it fall before introducing herself to him. He then thanks her for saving it, and after promising to get her a complimentary glass of wine, he leaves to help a lady who keeps complaining about her window and the risk of getting suffocated by smoke. Just as he tries to explain that the train has a steam engine, he remembers the weird complaint almost all the passengers have been making and activates a poison detector before learning that the train has been modified to produce a colorless smoke that affects the senses. After running to the central car, he uses his gun to blast open all the windows, causing all the smoke to clear out. The next moment, he sees Makoto with Momo and walks over to say hi to his father-in-law by threatening to blow his brains out if he takes a single step. Just then, Yuki shows up to greet him again, and Momo suddenly gets behind him, so he tries to shoot but gets wrapped up by Yuki's hair. Makoto then tells him that she is the only person alive who has achieved 100% compatibility with his synthetic Yozakura blood. He further explains that all the intel they have been getting was intentionally released to draw him out because Tampopo needs to compare the data from a fight between someone enhanced by Yozakura blood and Yuki. After thanking him for being stupid enough to fall into their trap, he leaves with Momo, and Yuki immediately tries to squeeze the life out of him. But he manages to break out with his new powers before charging to take her down. Despite all his evasive moves, she still swats him away like a worthless housefly and casually decides to give him a crash course on her history with Hazakura. After pulling a picture from 10 years ago when she was about to croak due to having cancer, she explains how the drug helped her live on, with the only exception being that she only had 10 years because the drug slowly eats away at regular human cells. She then shows him the painful death waiting for people like her who managed to reach full compatibility. And when he asks why she would subject herself to such a life, she reminds him that she was practically already dead before the drug and claims to be happy that she at least gets to serve the organization one last time by giving them the information they need to take down Matsumi and her entire family. Hearing this causes Taiyo to fully lock in, so he unlocks the upgraded form of his gun to grant her wish of having one last fight. After summoning and recruiting every muscle fiber in his body for a powerful attack, he cuts right through her hair, but she easily regenerates it and forces him back before unleashing an endless flurry of attacks. The next moment, she starts communicating with him in Morse code, but makes it too fast for anyone without Yozakura blood to see. He gets confused by this until she tells him that Makoto simply cannot find out that she wants to reveal how she is connected to the death of his family. As he freezes in shock, she takes him on a trip down memory lane to her birthday 10 years ago, when she was still bedridden in the last stages of cancer. His parents had stopped by to celebrate by gifting her a beautiful pair of earrings, and after she thanked them for it, Makoto showed up to tell them to expect good news from the new clinical trial he was about to put her through. After thanking him and getting emotional, his parents left the hospital but kept checking on her until just a couple months later, when she finally got discharged and was healthy enough to experience a normal life. Barely a month after that, she went for a checkup with Makoto and told him all about her progress before he suddenly decided to show her something. When they got to a lab filled with the shriveled corpses he had injected with Hazakura before her, she dropped to her knees in horror and asked if Taiyo's parents were in on the plan. However, he told her not to worry because he had already made sure they all died being the upstanding citizens they dedicated their lives to becoming. After claiming that Makoto manipulated her with a claim that his research was important to save the lives of millions like her, she shows Taiyo the earrings his parents gave her and says there are GPS devices inside both of them, which he can use to track down Makoto's hideout when the time comes. To make sure he doesn't suspect a thing, she resumes the fight and blasts Taiyo through the roof, but he suddenly goes berserk and attacks. With Matsumi's blood doubling his strength by the second, Makoto gets excited by this, but after Momo tells him that a blind rampage will only end in Taiyo getting himself hurt, Yuki captures him and says he will never be able to protect his new family if he doesn't learn to control his rage. This causes him to remember all his trauma from the accident and how far he has come since then, so he powers up once more to free himself before cutting into his thigh to spill some of the blood, causing him to lose it. With his mental state leveled, he channels everything left in the tank into a final attack, but this time he easily slices right through her body. She immediately accepts her fate and apologizes for everything after falling into his arms, but after saying that what happened is none of her fault, he tells her that his parents told him a lot about her before she succumbs to her injuries. As Taiyo then remembers that he still has to stop the train, a huge wolf arm suddenly appears behind him and rips through his back, but the real shock sets in when he sees that the attack came from a girl named A. Just then, another mutated freak named Mizuki reminds her to always go for the head and rubs her head for managing to land a powerful blow on him. The moment he grabs Taiyo's neck to burn through his throat with poison-filled cells, Futaba shows up with Ren to help him. Upon seeing them, A immediately jumps onto the track and ignores Mizuki's warnings to come back. She then tries to land an even stronger punch on Ren, but ends up getting blasted away by the insanely powerful aura leaking out of her body. Mizuki decides to take care of the girls by releasing the fatal poison gas sealed in his DNA, but with help from Ren, Futaba easily dissolves it before blowing the train apart and saving Taiyo, while Mizuki then decides to retreat with A and Yuki's body. On a secret island the next day, Makoto assembles his squad of mutant freaks for a party ahead of his grand plan. Meanwhile, Rin has just called for a meeting with the entire family to tell them about the island's location, which they were able to discover thanks to the earring Taiyo took from Yuki's body. After they all agree to have a joint invasive mission to end all of Makoto's plans once and for all, Taiyo decides to upgrade his skill with another few days of intense training, and everyone else takes the initiative to also start making preparations. Later that day, Taiyo tries to return his gun and finds Ban in his drawer before Keiko also shows up to make sure he doesn't take things too far. They head to the training ground, and Ban spends most of the week taking Taiyo's body to its absolute limit. 2 days before the mission, he decides to teach him about fully gaining control of the Yozakura blood flowing in his veins, and Taiyo gets excited to see what he has planned, only to end up receiving an extremely zesty salsa lesson. After minutes of twirling him around, he swears that none of it is for his own amusement before suddenly shooting Taiyo in the face at point-blank range. Matsumi immediately runs to check on him, and after seeing that he somehow managed to block it at the last millisecond with his sword, Ban apologizes for breaking it, upon seeing signs of full activation in his second eye, and suddenly shoots Matsumi. Once again, Taiyo blocks it, but with his bare hand this time, and after Ban explains his ability to harden all his cells at will, Taiyo threatens to carve his face if he ever pulls something so dangerous again. The next moment, Ban apologizes and says it was a prank he planned with help from Matsumi, who was wearing bulletproof material the entire time. The following night, they all gather around the family's cherry blossom tree for a huge family feast and spend the entire night indulging in countless activities to take their minds off the nearly impossible mission they have to take on. After several hours of goofing around, Matsumi gets on stage to brief them on the mission plan, and as soon as she rounds off a pep talk to get their spirits high, Kyoichiro drags Taiyo to the spot they buried their mother before telling him that her body is not really there. He then says that after she vanished on the night Matsumi was attacked, Tanpopo suddenly started making so much progress with their research and the production of Hazakura, which can only mean that they have been using her body. When he says that they both have to secretly recover it without telling anyone else, Taiyo asks why he would trust him to carry out such an important mission. Kyoichiro then says that the others might lose control of their emotions if they learn that Makoto has been experimenting with their mother's body. Just as he pulls Taiyo's face closer to explain the torture techniques he will subject him to if he blabs to Matsumi, Futaba attacks him and asks if he now wants to get freaky with Taiyo before dragging him away. By the time the sun rises the following day, they all make it to the airspace above the island, and Makoto, who has just woken up, hears about it from Checha, a nerd who got his brain mutated and now serves as the incredibly ugly computer system running the entire hideout. After Keiko wishes them luck on the mission, they all get on Goliath's back and charge straight towards the entrance, while Shan tries to hack into the system and receives a not-so-friendly welcome from Cha-Cha. By then, Makoto has just heard that a chick named Akai has already gone up to welcome their guests, so he gets excited to finally watch her use her abilities to the max. By the time Goliath and the others spot her at the entrance, she summons a fiery hand of death to roast them in midair, but Futaba turns the attack on her and blasts through the entrance in the process. After Taiyo and the others get in, she notices a fleet of reinforcements pulling up before Akai tries to blow her up again. Once they both come face to face with each other, as she easily deflects another one of Akai's blasts, Makoto then tells Cha-Cha to call more reinforcements, but he says that will no longer be possible because Keiko just took out all their signal transmitters. Upon hearing this, Anuma decides to go join the fight, and when A expresses her concern for him, he tells her to save the tears for someone else because he plans to make a run for it if things get too bad. By then, Akai has already gotten tired of the smug look on Futaba's face, so she decides to fully activate the Hakazura in her system before unleashing a powerful explosion that covers the entire region. This sudden heat wave reaches a point where Shin starts struggling to read everyone else's heat signatures, but Futaba easily fans away the flames once again. While Akai decides to keep going until she gets tired, Taiyo and the others try to fight their way through an endless horde of mutated henchmen before getting a surprise visit from Kurosawa, another mutated freak who then manipulates his steel body to attack them. As Shinzo decides to fight him back with his endless supply of bullets, Futaba tells Akai to consider giving up so she won't have to inflict permanent damage, but Akai refuses, so she fully activates her Yozakura blood. Upon seeing this, she remembers when Makoto told her that it would be pointless to fight anyone in the Yozakura family if they go all out, but she still decides to fight and charges up a flaming arrow to test Futaba's strength. After she casually captures the arrow and turns it off like a candle, Makoto tells Akai to retreat because another blast would cause her body to burn up, but she ignores him and claims to have nothing else to live for before unleashing the most powerful blast of flames she can muster. Despite this, Futaba still easily blocks it all while getting even closer, and when she eventually gets close enough to stop her, Akai releases more flames. Instead of granting her wish to end it all, Futaba blows out the flames burning through her body and tells her to rest on her shoulders for a bit before calling Cheyenne, who finally hacks into most of the structures in the base. After locating the floor with test subjects, she tells Nano and Kengo to go save them, but after noticing the direction they are taking, Makoto sends Anuma to stop them. By the time he gets close enough to unleash his Sub-Zero level powers, Kengo deploys a couple dozen clones to keep him occupied, so Makoto decides to make Kurosawa murk all the test subjects instead so none of his intel will get leaked. A immediately tries to talk him out of it because some of the test subjects are her friends, but Mizuki quickly reminds her who is boss. The next moment, Kurosawa receives the order in tears through the henchmen working for them to reach the test subjects, but Shinzo suddenly pulls out a new weapon that manages to break through his iron cells. This surprises Kurosawa because no one has even been able to successfully attack him, so he decides to finish Shinzo off first. However, they both suddenly get separated by the walls, and as he immediately starts drilling, Cheyenne tells Shinzo to back down because Kurosawa might be a lot for him to handle. After he refuses and says he is ready to fully activate his blood if it comes down to it, she tries to change his mind, but Ayaka starts cheering him on and tells Cheyenne to believe in him because she watched the amount of work he put into preparing for the mission. Once Kurosawa makes it through, they resume the fight, and Shinzo easily maintains the upper hand, until Kurosawa breaks down his cells to cover the entire floor and stabs through his shield to inflict fatal injuries. As his body starts reaching critical levels, Shinzo remembers how scared he was after he first activated his blood and the speech his mom gave him about the importance of true strength. The next moment, he breaks through Kurosawa's attack and apologizes in advance if he goes a little overboard before fully activating his powers. After he uses a single attack to break off Kurosawa's arms, Iron Man notices that he can't regenerate anymore, so Shinzo explains that it's a common side effect of facing off against aura beyond his level of understanding. For some reason, this only increases Kurosawa's hunger for victory, and after a couple of seconds of trading blows, he notices that Shinzo's blood can help him regenerate. The moment he takes a direct shot at his bleeding arm, Shinzo thanks him for releasing the blood and calmly proceeds to chop his head off before calling the others to tell them that they don't have to worry about low-budget Iron Man. Right then, another group of henchmen spot him, but as they try to attack, their heads explode. After Makoto tells Cha-Cha that they should have installed the bombs in every test subject, Cha-Cha asks if it is really necessary to blow them all up after years of research, and Makoto responds by saying they are all meaningless to him as long as he has Matsumi's mum. Back in the chopper, Shine finally realizes what Makoto has planned and tells them all that he has stored several tons of Hazakura at the lowest point of the base with a plan to blow the whole thing up once it reaches maximum capacity. She further explains how he plans to have it poison the oceans and take its time spreading to coastal regions, from where a new wave of humanity will emerge after years of natural selection. After saying that they have 30 minutes to stop the explosion, she tries to hack into the system again, but Cha-Cha takes over her headset instead and says he knows that she relies on her enemy's power source to gain full control over their systems. Just then, Onuma shuts down the last power source, and Cha-Cha prepares to blow up Shan's mind with his. But at the last second, Kengo flips one of the power sources and tells Cheyenne not to worry before deploying his clones to escape Aonuma. With Cheyenne's help, he manages to turn on all the power sources, but just before he gets to the last one, Aonuma activates his Hazakura and gets to him just in time for the final showdown. Just then, Shine creates a momentary blackout, and Kengo immediately uses it to reveal his Aonuma clone before confusing both him and Cha-Cha, so they stop trusting each other. After Kengo decides to fully activate his powers, Shine reaches max capacity with the headset and activates hers as well. The next moment, Kengo finds the original Aonuma and starts telling him every detail of his miserable childhood, causing him to completely lose it. As Aonuma tries to strangle him, he takes him back to what life used to look like on the streets with his grandmother before she sacrificed herself one dreadful winter night to keep him warm. Remembering that day causes Aonuma to gradually lose control of his emotions, but Kengo uses that as an opportunity to appeal to his humanity until he finally decides to abandon the dark side and apologizes to Cha-Cha. Right then, Cha-Cha realizes that he is being watched by a higher intelligence, so Cheyenne tells him to not be so surprised and says he should have tried getting a life while he had the chance. After she blows him up along with the control room, Kyoichiro and Taiyo arrive at the final floor and break down the door to meet Makoto, who had been waiting for their showdown. When Makoto claims that there is nothing they can do to save anyone, Taiyo gets pissed off, but Kyoichiro tells him that it's a trap to make him fight because his body is rigged to set off the explosion if any serious damage is inflicted on it. Upon hearing that, Makoto commends him on figuring it out, but says they would have never been able to do anything regardless because Nano just got captured. Seconds ago, he had just helped the test subjects escape when I attacked him, and Mizuki followed closely behind to knock them all out with his poison gas. After neutralizing the poison with his DNA, Nano tries to talk some sense into him and promises that his research can free them from needing Hazakura to live on so they can easily rejoin society. But Mizuki turns down the offer and says he wants nothing to do with a society that left him rotting in a hospital bed. After A attacks him again, Mizuki starts injecting heavy doses of poison into his body. While he suffers, Taiyo fumes and tries to think of a way to fight until Sui and Oga show up to stop Mizuki and A. After Kyoichiro also hears from Rin, who just showed up to fight alongside Futaba, Taiyo becomes optimistic again and decides to focus all his attention on Makoto. Back in the research lab, A suddenly loses it and unleashes a flurry of attacks on Sui and Oga, while telling them not to take her only home away. As Mizuki then decides to continue poisoning Nano, he decides to fully activate his powers and covers the entire room with crystallized orbs that immediately cancel out all the poison he has already released. After he neutralizes the poison in his arm as well, Oga calls him to come take a look at A because she suddenly collapsed. Upon closer inspection, Sui claims to have seen her reaction in former test subjects right before they lost their lives. He immediately grabs her paw to try draining out the effects of Hazakura. But her condition takes a turn for the worse, so Mizuki tells him that they need to balance out her cells with someone of similar genetic makeup. As he starts transferring some of his mutated cells into her, it slowly cures her, but Nano notices that it would also mean death for him. Mizuki then takes the opportunity to tell them how he and Makoto found her in an abusive home and made sure her mother could no longer inflict any harm before taking her in. However, due to Makoto's addiction to randomly unalitting people he didn't find useful, he resorted to always keeping her scared to make sure she would be strong enough to survive. Upon hearing this, A begs him to stay, but he quickly apologizes for scaring her and promises that she no longer has to impress anyone before reducing into nothing. Just then, Cheyenne disconnects Makoto's body from the detonation mechanism, so Taiyo tries to smoke him with a powerful blast, but he treats it like a casual hot shower. Just as he tries to set off the bomb with his phone, Kyoichiro chops his body into bits, but tells Taiyo to stay alert because Makoto is apparently powerful enough to reassemble himself. After he says Cheyenne found some intel that suggests he has been alive for over a century, Makoto admits to it and says he started researching their family after World War II. After saying that there is nothing they can do to stop him, he drops a finger and unleashes a monstrosity made up of replicas of everyone he has ever modified and heads into the last chamber to set off the bomb on his own. However, Kyoichiro uses his webs to launch Taiyo through the beast so he can focus on defeating Makoto. After Cheyenne tells him to hold off Makoto for 5 minutes until she gains control of the detonation system, Taiyo forces him to the ground and promises to make sure he fails, but Makoto suddenly stabs right through his insides and pumps lethal doses of poison into his system. The next moment, he uses the Yozakura power he stole from Matsumi's mum to scramble Taiyo's mind with images from his past. After draining nearly every ounce of energy in him, he pins him to the wall and proceeds to inject him with even more poison, but Taiyo still manages to fight back and chops off his limbs. However, Makoto easily regenerates them before activating the toxic cells he embedded into Taiyo's body during the fight. As his life force slowly gets drained away, Makoto zaps what's left of his brain cells and decides to give him one last speech to justify his mission to mutate the entire planet. Just then, Matsumi senses Taiyo's reducing pulse through her ring, so she holds it close to her heart and transfers some energy to him. Moments later, Makoto completes his yap session and decides to put Taiyo out of his misery, but after smashing him further into the ground, Taiyo gets back up and releases an insane electrical blast that tears through Makoto's arms before blowing up all the tanks of Hazakura. Just as he then tries to tell Cheyenne that the mission was a success, Makoto attacks him again before revealing that he basically turned himself into a tank and now only has to blow himself up for the Hazakura to get into the ocean. Upon hearing this, Taiyo tries to stop him, but Kyoichiro and the others finally show up to help. The next moment, Kengo starts off a combination attack by turning his clones into drills to open holes across Makoto's body. Nano then leaks his toxins throughout his body to make him weak enough for a powerful sonic blast from both Futaba and Kyoichiro. Despite this, Makoto remains without so much as a scratch, which leaves them all in a state of confusion until Taiyo realizes what he just did and gives Kyoichiro a signal only he can understand. After Kyoichiro then tells the rest of them to get into position for a new attack, with Taiyo as the lead, Makoto calls him stupid for putting the weakest among them in front. However, after Futaba launches Taiyo into the air, Kengo creates a bunch of clones to confuse him before Futaba starts raining down countless rock bullets. As Makoto reminds them that regular material can't penetrate him, Kyoichiro tells them to intensify the attacks to keep him distracted from the fact that one of the bullets is actually Kyoichiro, who just got shot down to the secret floor under him, where Matsumi's mother's body is being kept. Just as he sees the capsule used to store her, he notices a web of threads connected to it, and after touching a single one, Makoto psychically connects to it to tell him that cutting off a single one will lead to an explosion that will be strong enough to destroy him. However, Taiyo still decides to sacrifice himself by ripping the shreds apart and blowing up the entire floor, leaving Makoto without enough Yozakura blood to maintain his current form. To make sure his plan succeeds, he quickly tries to blow himself up, but Futaba absorbs the blast, and while the others take turns attacking him, Taiyo uses the hardening effect Ban taught him to stay alive. After joining the fight to deliver the final blow on Makoto, he takes Kyoichiro down to the cold room so he can carry their mom's body. In just a couple of hours, Makoto gets transported to a maximum security cell, while A and the others get transported to correctional facilities for rehabilitation. Days later, Taiyo tries to return to his regular life in the mansion, but after he sees Matsumi in a wedding dress, Kengo switches his outfit to a tuxedo before Futaba and the others tell him to get ready for a proper wedding. After Ban and Keiko also show up for the ceremony, they spend the rest of the day celebrating the lovebirds with a bunch of friends from the underworld. With Taiyo's powers fully activated, will he finally be able to clap Matsumi without worrying about her psycho older brother? If you made it this far, leave a comment about your favorite Yokozuna sibling, and don't forget to turn on post notifications to make sure you never miss recaps like this.